All right, awesome. Hi, everybody. This is pretty exciting today. We have Nasita coming over from Eliza. There's a lot of talk about Eliza, so it's nice to get it straight from the horse's mouth. So this one's probably going to be pretty conversational. So if this is something you're wanting to explore and really dive into, but maybe you need some ideas or you're trying to figure out how to like flesh out an idea, something like that. This might be a really excellent opportunity to listen in and just kind of hear where some of the opportunities lie and maybe things that have been underexplored. That being said, Nasita, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Honestly, always excited to talk about ElizaOS, but I know we're also going to be talking about broadly AI agents and the utility in like a daily context, whether it's in a consumer capacity or whether it's in more of a B2B capacity. I'm very excited to kind of get to that part. So super excited to be here.
All right, awesome. I guess just to like kick the conversation off, um, maybe let's just talk a little bit about Eliza Labs. I mean, it's like open source projects, stuff
Yeah.
like that, kind of like an interesting format. Yeah, just maybe a quick bit about the history and maybe just a little bit of background on it. Everybody's heard the name, but not everybody knows so much like maybe what it is and how it functions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a fair bit of different nuance and details, so maybe this will help for a lot of folks. So some folks might have heard of AI16Z, not A16Z, AI16Z. A lot of folks are familiar with it. It's the same as ElizaOS. We've rebranded, a while back, and maybe the origin story. I know Shaw does a much better job at this, explaining the origin story than myself, so I won't try to butcher it. Kind of, if you've never heard of this and you're sort of like, what is this? So we are an AI agent framework. The simplest way to think about us is if you're interested in AI development or you're interested in AI development at the intersection of crypto, we're probably the team that, or the framework you want to start with, just to get a better sense of how do these things work? Like, what are the possibilities? That's how I would think of it. So ElizaOS is an open source framework. So you can look up our GitHub. There's lots of folks. We have a very thriving community on Discord. We have some Telegram channels as well. So I would highly encourage folks here that are interested and or even curious to just go explore and just try to learn a bit more. Another way maybe I'd even frame it is, if you've heard of AI agents and you're kind of like, well, what is that? I'm not quite sure. Or maybe you're, much further along the curve from like a seasoned standpoint. You're like, oh yeah, absolutely. I know what this is. Like, I know how to deal with this. I would highly encourage looking up ElizaOS GitHub to start with, because it is a thriving ecosystem. There are tons of ways to contribute to the ecosystem, or just even get started to understand how can you build your own agent, whether it's for testing, whether it's for something as, hey, you have an idea and you really want to bring it to life and maybe even build a whole business around it, or you're an enterprise client or somebody like that who's trying to figure out, actually, we'd love to build an agent for our internal purposes. So regardless of what your desired outcome is, this is probably a good place to start understanding what that looks like.
Okay, awesome. And also something I've definitely gotten questions on, and is maybe a little nitty gritty in the implementation
No,
details,
please.
but I know some people ask about it. Version 1 versus version 2.
Yes. Okay.
So there's two different ways to spin that up. And
Yes.
like, if you mix and match documentation, you're probably
Yeah.
going to get a
You
little
get a
bit
little
confused.
for
But
you.
yeah, maybe advantages, disadvantages, kind of what rolled out, maybe what influenced the decision to do a version 2,
Yeah.
things like that.
Okay, even before I get to that, there's a little nuance and kind
Okay.
of a context, just because sometimes we do use terminology and words like interchangeably, and even that
Mhm.
could be like, wait, which one are we talking about? So the context here is, when ElizaOS started, it was really a project out of, community love and all of the wonderful things. And so I think the way we're starting to think about that is it was really, actually, let me pause. So there's also a core team work called Eliza Labs.
Mhm.
So if you're hearing the term Eliza Labs, that's actually the core team that is helping, build out the ElizaOS ecosystem along with the contributors within the broader ecosystem. So as Eliza Labs, we are working on the current version. So there's the historical version, or the original version, maybe I should call it. So that was originally called V1. So when we're talking about V1 versus V2, we're actually referring to that original version, and the V2 being the most recent version that we're working on as a team. The reason I keep going back to original and the current version, and you'll get the context of why I'm being a little, maybe not as direct here, is because as Eliza Labs, this is the first version that we're putting out, first version being the current version we're talking about, sometimes referred to as V2. But if you're looking at it on GitHub or at the code level, it might be called V1 actually. So that's the part I don't want folks to get confused. Part of the reason it's called V1 in a GitHub level is because it is the first actual version we as Eliza Labs are putting out into the world. Understanding that the initial version, you could think of it kind of similar to like a research project. So it was really from the love that it came from, but because this is kind of the initial attempt at like putting this out, we're calling it V1, but it's also sometimes called V2. So apologies for the confusion, but so I personally just say, is this the original version or is this the most recent version? That I find is maybe a bit more descriptive for myself.
Okay, that actually makes a ton of sense because there isn't necessarily like a documentation split of like, here's V1, here's V2, that kind of thing. And okay, so that clarifies actually a lot of things, hearing kind of what the organizational structure is behind that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Maybe a little bit of because you did also ask well, why did we go from the original version to this current version? As much as we all love the original version, and it's very broadly loved by the community as well, there's a number of DevX type of improvements that could have been done. Shaw went on, this listening and speaking to folks after V1 really took, or the original version really got popular. And there's a lot of feedback that he's heard. Even I've, myself and others, from a DevX standpoint, there's always room for improvement. And that's just natural. There's always room for improvement, regardless of what we're talking about. So that's where a lot of the current version, which is as of today, May 8th, it is available as beta. The reason I point out the date is there is a beta version out. It has been for a few weeks. So that one, sometimes called V2 Develop branch, or some variation of that. So that one, yes, it's out. But for the sake of the hackathon, and bear with me, I will suggest folks actually use the original version. Couple of reasons why I'm suggesting folks use the original version is because while we're still working on the beta and kind of getting to the launch of V2 or the most recent version, things are going to be changing and shifting. And if you are someone who's well, I'd rather things be stable, which understandable, because personally, I sometimes would rather prefer things are not moving under my feet, because, that means I'm being kept on my toes maybe a little bit more. In that case, it would be probably more helpful to just have a stable version, which is the original version to start building on. Having said that, though, the moment we go live with the most recent version of V2, we will have support and documentation and all the other stuff on how do you actually migrate over. So it's not meant to be, oh God, now I have to rebuild. No, don't think of it that way. Part of the reason I keep saying, hey, it's okay to build on the original version because it's stable. We're not tinkering with it as much. But the moment the newer version is out live, and we know that it's kind of there will be a way to migrate it over, so you can actually benefit from any of the improvements that are available in the most recent version.
Okay, awesome. Great background there. So I guess within context of this dev sprint that we're doing here, is there just kind of opening the broad conversation here? are there any areas, and this is something I've been like asking kind of everybody who's come through, are there any areas that you feel are like low hanging fruit that people are under exploring? Because it is common to have like, of course, like anytime you like walk into like maybe you're new to agents or something like that, there's kind of a pipeline of like a couple different kinds that you would build, kind of get up to speed, wrap your brain around it, stuff like that. And so you end up with a pretty big um, compendium of those types of projects. But then there's the things that maybe if you've been working with it for a little while, you're like, wow, nobody's like seeing this advantage here, and it's really obvious. Is there anything like that that you're kind of like feel like you're screaming into the void to see help?
Um, I'm sure there's lots of things that I could share. So maybe let me take a step back.
Okay.
So I'm going to assume the folks that are watching this, or whether now or some future date, might also want to understand like kind of like a super high level overview of how to think about ElizaOS as compared to maybe other options that are available. And there's plenty. One key differentiator, as an example, I guess not an example, is we're open source, which fundamentally is different than something that isn't. And some of the key components that I would, just in terms of like mental models, like how I would think of how Eliza is set up, is you can choose and really fine tune the character or personality of your agent. I think that's actually really valuable depending on the use case. Most folks, I would argue, would be very excited. I know I am. Because if I'm interacting with an agent and the agent has like the very specific humor that might resonate for me, fantastic. Like our rapport is going to be so much better, as opposed to one that maybe that doesn't resonate for me. I think that's different again. So I think agent personality, it's also referred to as like the character file. So you can really fine tune what that looks like. Some examples might be, you could use context around like, hey, you were a librarian from this period to this period of your life, or, you're really friendly, or whatever those may be. And in some, like what I also do is I actually take examples, like snippets of whether it's questions and answers or just conversations of like how I want those the tone to really sound, to really fine tune the tone to get it to what my desired state might be. So there's a lot of room there that I think folks can really play with. And one of the really cool things about ElizaOS is that once you have that personality fine tuned for your agent, you can have it consistent across platforms. So, I mean, I'm kind of jumping into the use case here, so just bear with me for 2 seconds. So let's say I have an agent who is going to be on my Discord channel, my Telegram, and my Twitter. And I can actually make it such that this agent's personality is consistent across those 3 things. So I think that's actually really cool because it fundamentally does enable a whole different set of possibilities when we're able to keep things consistent. Something is simple, or maybe not so simple, like personality, because it keeps it consistent across the different things. Another one I would say is like, think about like which platforms or clients like you want to launch your agent on. And it doesn't even have to be like, a social media platform necessarily. It could even be just on your local machine if that's what someone wants to use it for. So it's kind of boundary-less in that sense that, where you might want to interact with that agent, whether it's for your personal use or whether it's for, in more of a, your agents interacting with your friends, family, or your community, or your customers or clients, whatever that may be. Where that platform ends up being, you can really figure out and like curate that to meet your desired outcomes, I'd say. And with that comes, choosing LLMs, because this is powered by all of our favorite thing, which is, there's so many LLMs out there these days that you can really pick your choice. And in some cases, you can pick and choose where you want to use one LLM versus another one. Because I think we might all have our favorites and our preferences of like, well, this specific type of research, I think this is the one for me. Or if for this other thing, this might be the more appropriate one. So that's another thing I think you can play with. And one cheat thing that I personally do when it comes to how I set up my agent is I'll usually have multiple API keys for multiple LLMs that I have, because I've definitely had this scenario where I'm like timed out or like, capped out my tokens, and I'm like, oh darn. So I think having a backup or a couple also kind of gives you that additional cushioning, as I like to think of it, of, you can pretty seamlessly switch between those things. So those are some key things from like a key components of like are all the building blocks that I would think about. My favorite next one is plugins. So plugins really enable a number of things that we just talked about, but also so much more. So I usually always like to start when I'm talking about agents, like from like a use case standpoint of what exactly do I want the outcome to be, or what am I trying to achieve? And then I re-engineer my way back to say, okay, well, if I need my agent, I'm just going to come up with an example. So everybody just be patient, or could appreciate the continued patience. Let's say I want an agent that I would love. I'll use a personal example. I'd love an agent that was on all the platforms, because I humanly am limited in my ability to be everywhere at all times, to be honest. And the agent is able to triage for me which of those messages need to be actually reviewed by me versus which of those can just be responded because there is already, it's a frequently asked question, and it can be addressed quite reasonably. So I'd love for this agent to be able to respond. And I know I'm talking to folks on Twitter, I'm talking to folks on Telegram, I'm talking to folks on Discord. So let's just keep it for those 3 platforms for now. So I've already answered, okay, well, I'm talking to folks on these 3 platforms, and assuming I do want to provide, responses and want to make sure that it's covered in those platforms, that already answers my platform question of like, what are the different clients or platforms that I need the agent to be on? The next thing is, are there specific topics I'm interested in, or I want to make sure that I'm using or leveraging my agent or leaning on my agent to help me with? It could be, well, all my friends are usually asking me, what are my Christmas plans? So if that's the case, like I can make sure that my agent has access to my calendar information or some set of information that says, well, I'd love to go to New Zealand for Christmas, because New Zealand's beautiful. Also, let's figure out whatever other details. So the agent could actually, regardless of each of these different platforms, already has a set of knowledge that it can pull from, and it knows how to be able to respond to some of these questions that maybe don't yet require my, for me to actually look at any of these things, because they're just answers that are not going to change too much. Anyways, so plugin. So from there, I might say, okay, well, what are the different plugins I might need to do this? I might need a plugin to allow my agent to have access to my calendar. That'll be a plugin. I'll probably need a plugin for Twitter, because I did say I needed a platform, for my agent to be on Twitter. So I need a Twitter plugin as an example, a Discord plugin. I also mentioned Telegram, so I need a Telegram plugin. So I always find it very helpful to start with like, what is kind of my intended outcome that I'm trying to get, and back myself in re-engineering context. And that will help me identify what types of plugins I might want to use. Because there's so many plugins that are available. There's hundreds of them. So I'll maybe stop talking for now. But yeah, that's, yeah.
Hey, you're here to talk. This is fantastic. Honestly, the longer you go on, the better it seems to get with actual on the ground details here of what to do. This is excellent.
So maybe on that note, if that's okay, because sometimes... Yeah. So we'll come up with ideas, let's just say, and then we're sort of like, okay, where do I start? Because that's a natural next question. It's like, okay, I figured out what I want to build, or at least I have a general sense of like, okay, I think, roughly this is the concept or the idea I want to build. So the next question is like, where do I start? Like, what do I do? And that answer is going to be maybe a little different depending on who I might be or where I'm starting from. Because I might be someone who's, never used the terminal on my computer. That's possible, but I have wonderful ideas, and we want folks to still be able to start and get to deploying an agent and getting to that desired outcome. Or I'm someone who's completely seasoned and like, oh yeah, totally, like I do this all day, every day. I could do this in my dream. So regardless of where my starting point is, I would still suggest GitHub and our documentation. But a few things I'll call out. Something as simple as like having Python is going to be something that you're going to want on your computer, on your device. You want to have Node.js 23 or higher. The reason I make an explicit point to call out 23 or higher for version is because the number of times I've ran into errors because I somehow ended up on like version 21 or something, although I did make a point to download 23 or higher version. So always check your version as you're going through, just to make sure, because computers or technology likes to keep us on our toes. So that sounds silly, but personal experience, I've been caught on this many times for reasons I don't even understand, but that's okay. And you want to have PNPM, and you want to choose your choice of a code editor. It could be Cursor, it could be Visual Studio, it could be whatever else that kind of resonates for you. I would say these are some like super high level prerequisites. And again, depending on where your starting point is, there might be additional things that you might need to start with, especially if you've never used your terminal or you've never done ran ElizaOS on your computer before. So it might be slightly different based on that starting point. For my wonderful Windows users, you are going to need one additional thing, WSL2. So if you're using Windows, make sure you have that one additional thing in addition to all the other things I mentioned before. So these are the things I would say, please do take a look at it. Another one I want to call out is there are some amazing human beings that have created some wonderful content, community folks, which I'm incredibly grateful for. We do have a YouTube channel, ElizaOS developer channel. Do take a look at that one, because that channel we've tried to, as we come across, some of them our team would have created the content. So a number of them are folks from the community, whether it's demos of, hey, here's an agent I've built, and I love these because this really gives me an idea of oh shit, I could do this. That's really cool. So it gets the creative juices flowing. So I would say from an inspiration standpoint, I think those are really cool. Another category is we also have a tutorial of plugins. Because there are so many plugins, we're slowly starting to work our way to making sure we can get a how-to video of each of the plugins that are available, because it really allows for anyone starting or even someone seasoned to say, I can't remember how I do this. Maybe let me just go look that up. So it's very helpful. Going back to the community videos, some of my favorites are folks that just create videos, something hey, how do you create an Eliza agent in less than 15 minutes? I love those because it gets anyone from 0 to 1 really quickly, and they're being specific, 15 minutes. That's all I need. I think those are super cool. So do want to give a shout out to all those folks that are creating some amazing content. But if you do look at the ElizaOS developer YouTube channel, there's a bunch of them pinned. There's a bunch of other ones that are created by our team. So please take a look at that. We also have an event calendar, because one of the things that I've realized, personal experience, Austin, I don't know, feel free to chime in, but when we're interacting with a new ecosystem or a new product, it's natural to get excited sometimes of oh my God, this sounds really, really cool. And then wondering, well, is there anything happening in my local community, my city, or maybe the city I'm going to? I think it would be really cool to be able to meet some of these folks, and or just knowing, where are these events happening? Because sometimes it's really, really hard, or at least it's not easy when we're starting somewhere. So we have an event calendar that it's a public facing calendar. So when you look at that calendar, you will have a list of all the hackathons that are running at any given point in time, regardless of what time zone you are in. Because one of the things, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to UX. I have to admit that. What I mean by that is sometimes I struggle with the most randomest thing. I cannot for the life of me figure out some days how to convert time zones. There's I don't know, I've used World Buddy. I use, all of my
100% understand there.
It's sometimes you just get it wrong by an hour. And it's just I swear I know that was UTC, but
yes,
that's okay. So this calendar is meant to overlay just on top of your existing calendar. So let's say I'm using Google Calendar as an example. I overlay this calendar onto my own personal calendar. So then the events that I see, they're going to be visible on my own time zone. Sounds so basic, but I think it just like simplifies the user experience of knowing.
We've had to start doing that with events too. Like it's a wonderful advantage of the industry that everybody's around the world and everything, and like always at reach, stuff like that. But yeah, that little hitch at the time zones is enough
just
to
like
throw you off your normal
0.001%, but it's like stepping on a Lego.
Yeah,
it sounds basic, but it hurts. So
yeah, because I'm currently in Central time zone. A lot of my team's on Eastern, and it's just close enough to catch you off guard. Like when I was in California, it was a 3-hour difference. You're going to notice it, but those little differences.
Yeah, absolutely. So the event calendar will take care of all of those little, slight little hiccups, which happen to all of us. So I would highly suggest looking at that as well, just in terms of if you're ever curious, like, because we do weekly demo sessions and, we're obviously having conversations like these things. So we want to make sure people can find all this information easily. But yeah, so that's kind of my spiel. I'd love to talk a little bit more about like our use cases.
Well, yeah, I would absolutely love to. Real quick though, if somebody is like, feels like, okay, die hard, this is what I love and I'm interested in, and maybe they want to start contributing.
Yeah.
Would you recommend probably those, like that calendar is a good place, show up to one of those, kind of like see that kind of stuff, start conversations there? Is that where you would recommend, or?
Great question. So 2 places I would suggest. Definitely look at the event calendar, because I think on a move forward basis, it'll always be the place you could look at to see what events are happening, how, like, what are different places. Discord is also another really good place. You won't see the same type of information presented in the same way for obvious reasons, Discord versus calendar, but it's a good way to start engaging with people immediately, I'd say. But event calendar definitely is the one if you're just like, hey, maybe I just want to show up to one of these events and kind of go from there. Absolutely. That is the easiest way to start kind of getting involved.
Okay, fantastic. Well, with that being said, yeah, I would love to dive into use cases and start kind of pushing and pulling on that a bit.
No, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go.
Oh my gosh. So use cases, there's so many. So right before we started the recording, we were both just sort of chatting about how it's a world of possibilities, right? There's just literally anything we can think of, we could probably test and see, does this work and what's the value associated to it? I have some like really nuanced use cases that I know we're both excited to talk about. But maybe before we jump to that, some of the top of mind use cases might be like, hey, a DeFi, agent, a really good one that does a variety of different specific scenario, really specific things, which would be really cool. There are also agents that could be, something like a sport betting agent. That would be kind of cool. Like, I don't quite know how to make that happen, but like, I know that would be really, really cool. Another one could be like your, a marketing agent or like a social media agent, even a DevRel agent. Like, I know every DevRel I talk to, we all agree that it's like, yes, like we just need that. Like we just do. Another one could be like a community manager, because I think there's, from like an engagement standpoint, it's always helpful to, especially if they're questions that have very clear answers, and they need to be available to folks in multiple languages, multiple different time zones. Maybe the starting point could be different. So for example, we were talking about like, hey, how do I get started on, ElizaOS? Like, depending on where someone's starting from, the answer might look different, because I might have to just change the context in how I share that information. So I think like those things would be really, really cool. A few other things, like I think gaming agents would be really cool. Like, imagine having agents that, are able to like have object recognition and use those visuals into an input and basically, like actually be able to perform things. Like, that would be really, really cool, especially while I'm sleeping. I think that would be very helpful if I could,
I wish I had one back in my RuneScape days.
Right? Like, I mean, that would make my life easy. It's like, hey,
Oh,
here's my
sure.
friend who just takes over when I just need a timeout.
Yeah, you can only grind so much.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, it's okay to touch grass. Like we should be touching grass. So I think
Yeah,
that's where,
exactly.
yeah, that's where I think it's super helpful. Other things like even forecasting, I think that would be really cool. Polymarket, I think would be a completely different space. Like we could kind of figure out like how do you crowdsource or like wisdom to be able to ship something onto Polymarket with agents. I think there's something interesting there. Governance is another really big topic in terms of like what role can agents play with governance. Robotics, obviously, there's a lot of DSI related stuff, research, debate agents and things like that. There are also orchestration of swarms. I think that's going to be really, really interesting, especially post V2 launch, because there's a lot of interesting, like as soon as you start to have multiple agents and being able to have like in framework conversations, there's going to be some interesting things that will come out of it. There's going to be some interesting challenges as well. There's another idea someone was talking about, this idea of like let's say somebody built a specific agent that does research in a very specific way, let's say chemistry related research, but they're able to take the weights that they've used for that and publish it in like in ZK or something like that. And then other agents could also be able to leverage the same weights to then be able to either recreate or do more interesting things. So I think there's a lot of like really cool different types of broad set of things that can be done. But I do want to take some time to talk about some of our favorite ones, which are more on the, I think the like nuanced one. So one of the examples before we get to the one I know we're both interested in it might sound a little like, but they're real use cases is how I'm going to frame it.
They are. And when the rubber hits the road with these things, that's probably what they're going to end up looking like.
Exactly.
We're kind of burying the lead here a little bit.
Yes, exactly. And just one more thing, and I swear we'll jump to that. One example is like I remember speaking with someone who this might be there's a geographic context as well. So this person was in North America, specifically in the US, and they run like a medical practice. And I remember speaking about agents, and the person's eyes just lit up. And this is a physician who runs their own private practice and hires to run that private practice. And their thinking was, oh my God, like keep me in the loop. Like I really want to know. And I was like, that's really, I don't think I've ever had someone outside the industry have that level of like excitement. So I was sort of just genuinely curious, like, okay, tell me more. Like, what's on your mind? And the person shared one scenario where they have their front desk person or someone specific that they have to hire because sorry, not because, but the person is required to spend X amount of time per day making these phone calls, which they believed there could be a more efficient way to deal with it. So my understanding, so take it with a grain of salt. So every time a patient comes in to that clinic, it seems this is broader than just that one clinic. And before the billing is taken care of for that patient, the clinic has to call the patient's insurance company to verify certain pieces of information. And so today, the way it's done is they are manually calling them and staying on hold anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes per patient. And just to verify a bunch of information. And once it's confirmed, they're able to just go ahead with the billing things and take care of the administrative things. And this person's, I remember this person sharing with me that, hey, if there was an agent that could do that for me, that would simplify a couple of different things. Like, the front desk person can actually spend the time speaking with the patients and trying to get more information as opposed to just staying on hold for like 30 to 90 minutes. Like that's probably not the best use of their time, nor do they enjoy being on hold for, I know I definitely don't like being on hold, let alone for up to 90 minutes. That just sounds like watching paint dry. Not a fun thing in my mind. So to me, there's so many interesting use cases that maybe we don't think of on a day-to-day basis, but these pockets exist. And from like a revenue generation standpoint, if someone's thinking about building a solution that they would like to monetize, is folks might say, hey, I'd rather pay X number of dollars per month, like as a SaaS solution that still addresses my, of being able to get this information. Because a part of me was like, well, why can't you just have an API that just provides this information? And in the absence of that, you can still leapfrog it, I guess, with an agent and, kind of mimic this concept and still be able to get the information. So that was just one. Okay, so the next one, I feel like this is the one we both like. So most of us don't really think about our HVAC or plumbing until something goes wrong. I know I definitely don't think about it until something goes wrong. Like something's leaking, something's not working, and you're like, oh, what's going on? An interesting fact that I've learned, at least from my little understanding, so again, take it with a grain of salt, is there are so many, construction and, and the broader, I'm going to bucket them in one. So apologies for anyone that's not intended to be bucketed. So there's a lot of manual steps still involved. So a lot of, let's say, general contractors or HVAC technicians, or it could be plumbers, they sometimes, well, more often than not, they're individual contractors. Either they're working as like a solo entrepreneur and or they're working as part of like working under a brand, but they're actually like the brand is outsourcing the work to this individual contractor. So given the fluidity and kind of the flexibility of how these things work and how it's historically been set up, most of the stuff is still done quite manually. Something as simple as like, hey, for example, if I needed a plumber, I'm actually calling a plumber. Like I'm picking up a phone and like having to call someone and trying to get a quote. And I'm also trying to explain to them like, what my issue I'm looking to be serviced is. And in some cases, I might go to some of these brands where I put in this request, but they, again, are having to send it to these individual folks. So there's a lot of opportunity for efficiency from like a tech standpoint. I think that just simplifies everyone's life. Because I remember speaking with someone who said, yeah, I'd rather not have to take the call and try to do scheduling and rather spend that time actually doing the job itself. I think most of us probably can agree. And what's really also interesting is given the, like, sometimes the invoice itself is still written on paper, which might sound wild to some people, maybe not so much for others, but imagine if an agent like could take the calls, schedule the thing, and the the plumber or the technician just shows up and does the work and has the conversation with the client, assuming that was required. But then they're able to service so many more from like even their ability to generate revenue, as opposed to spending 3 hours trying to figure out what their availability looks like, how much time it's going to take them from getting from one job to the other, because they seem like they're close, but they're not quite sure. So now they have to go look at Google Maps or just try to figure out like how much time it's going to take from a traffic standpoint. Like that's a lot of administrative work sometimes that might not directly lead to an outcome that they are looking for. So anyways, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And in my mind, it almost, I'm going to use the term leapfrog here, because rather than having to use like a CRM and then an agent, you're actually going from like the current state, which whether it's completely manual or some version of it, to having an agent who essentially is your support system, who helps deal with all of this work so you can do your best work, which I think is really cool. And what's really interesting here is like in the last few years, I'm sure there's other industries as well that PE firms have started to gobble up, like from an M&A standpoint, mostly acquisitions, where they're starting to, acquire a bunch of these like small mom and pop shop ones and like fold them in, because they do see some of these opportunities, like from an operational efficiency perspective. So I think there's something really, really interesting there. But I know, Austin, you have lots of thoughts on this one.
I do. So a little bit of background on myself. My first career, I was an architect, and specifically I worked in structural engineering firms. So
Fascinating.
there were Gantt charts that would make you cry. Like,
I could imagine. Any
like,
Gantt chart would probably make me cry even today. So
like From coordinating with like city dates, which are really hard to get, that are far out, to like certain deadlines, inspection dates, these sequences of events that have to happen are enormously complex, right? And you end up with all these collisions where like maybe somebody's off by a day, so now you have to shift the thing back, but that other thing shifts back. So enormous complexity with actually like planning out a construction project, right? So that's one place that's absolutely worth looking at. But it is true, the construction industry, and I know this is a blockchain dev sprint, but I think it's worth, if we are going to talk about agents, talk about where maybe the largest opportunity for innovation lies. And honestly, yeah, construction, it's still so much done on paper. The
Yeah.
letter you get from the city often might be a sticky note slapped onto a construction document. The bid you get, that now you're having to compare all these bids, a lot of it might be a handwritten invoice, something like that. And then on top of that, even the process of making those construction drawings, it goes through rounds of literally printing out these huge sheets of paper, and somebody sits down with a red pen and starts circling, right, for errors. So much of it relies on pens and printers, and it's kind of insane. And just so much little tedious work, which would be very easily automated, because it is true, like AI is not at the point where I think it can reliably be like, hey, we need a building with this many square foot. Here's a land survey. Take care of it start to end. That's not really the way you should probably be using it. But throughout this process, helping with those sequences, and honestly, the amount of little things you have to remember, that if you could just get a little ping back to say, hey, is this in the process? Things like that. Something with like a little bit of guidance can be really, really useful. And it also makes me think of there's like a meteorologist YouTube channel called Ryan Hall. If you're in the US in an area that gets a lot of storms, you probably come across him because he does live streams tracking the radar and everything. But something he's been working on for the last few months is like an AI assistant, just because like following all these charts, all these different like radar formats, all of that across the country, it's too much for one person to look at. So just having some assistant that helps be like, hey, maybe you should be looking over here, and then guiding him to use his own intuition in that area. That's what professionals are really looking at or looking for. Like, they don't necessarily need a replacement for their own expertise and learned instincts, but something that helps them be in more places at once, because that's what kind of breaks them. That's what honestly drove me out of the construction industry. I was like, I don't want to deal with this situation of these massive breakdowns between contractors and the client that I have to mitigate because of a scheduling conflict. And now there's a lawsuit, right? When that was like something avoidable, where if everybody could be kind of put on the same rails following this thing, it would really, it would really help with it. Because you do have that issue, right? That you have any form of engineering where there's only so many engineers you can put on a task before it's not diminishing returns, it's negative returns.
Correct.
Um, so helping, I think, small, tight, very skilled teams just have more administrative um, area that they can cover, so that their expertise and all these things that they've really honed, so that that human element can be applied really accurately.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff people would go heads over heels to pay for, right? People pay a lot of money for Asana, things like that, these
Exactly.
programs. And if you could have one that does the job better and doesn't require them to put a huge amount of time managing the manager,
Yeah.
yeah, taking that linkage out would be massive. But
No, 100%. I think the key that we're like you're highlighting here is also because sometimes I think this is natural for all of us. Sometimes we'll come up with a solution first or like a tool, and then we're trying to figure out, okay, where does this fit? Like, what problem does this solve? I think what we're highlighting here from a use case standpoint is there's all these other, traditional, let's just call them traditional problems that have existed. So if someone was looking for an existing problem to solve, these are fantastic spots that maybe we don't think of like immediately, but they exist. And being able to solve those problems, like from a revenue generation standpoint, would be really, really cool, because you already have a preset client who has their preset, like, business model of how they're generating revenue, and, the margin of how much they're willing to pay for something like an Asana or some sort of like a SaaS type of solution. Like, even if that's the format somebody chooses to take from a pricing standpoint, that's a slightly different journey unpack versus something, I have this really cool thing. Now I'm trying to figure out, okay, where's the product market fit? Because there's already a market that exists. There are already existing problems. So there's different ways, but absolutely. I also generally encourage people to build solutions that can solve some of these, because your target market is actually bigger than you might realize. So I mean, think that's something to be mindful of.
It's a huge argument for just like, I know it's tempting just to like stay in your, my wife used to call it like my hole. There was like a closet that for a while we had a small apartment, and that's where I worked in. And it was like, I'd go in the hole and disappear for 16 hours. Right. And it's really tempting to do that, but there is a lot of importance if you're wanting to build something. Just get out there and talk to people. Maybe you wouldn't normally.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how you find this thing out, right? And like talk to like the weird old head at the mom and pop shop.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is like, if I have any like ray of optimism and like where all this goes, and I'm glad you brought up the really niche issue of things like HVAC and plumbing and electrician shops getting bought up by private equity. Because what tends to happen is like this level of service that people kind of need, stuff like that. The second it gets absorbed by private equity, the price goes up, but the amount that they can actually cater to the need of the client goes downward. And you start to end up with these massive, out of control construction costs and maintenance costs and everything. And we already know there's a housing crisis, and like the whole thing compounds and the whole thing explodes, right? And I think there is a world in which having these types of tools would help those mom and pop shops achieve the level of efficiency they need to actually hold their own against that private equity. Because if their level of service that they can provide can start to approach the level of efficiency that like these private equity firms might be striving for, then suddenly, why would anybody want the one at the private equity firm, right? They're not the domain masters of this thing. The mom and pop store is. They're the domain experts. So I think there's something in there of like giving a lot more power to these people with these like very human skills. And it's that hybridization. It's like not post-humanism, like transhumanism, right? Like throw the controversial words out there. Yeah, so I think that's, get out there and talk to the weird person at the bar, and they might end up giving you the idea you didn't know was the one that you really needed to follow.
100%. Just going back into even what you were sharing around, like, providing more support for like a small, medium business, because again, it not to get all philosophical in this conversation, because I feel like now we've just taken the whole conversation in a different direction.
My brain's going, and I try to like, all right, let's.
That's okay. Just for I guess a bit more, regardless of what it is, because again, sorry to take it on tangents a little bit. Like, I obviously don't know the thesis that these PE firms are using for their acquisition strategies, but one of the things I would think is this ability to consolidate like that efficiency, which is what like I think technology broadly presents itself, agents being one of those key components from my vantage point. So to your point, if that's already provided to these mom and pop shops, or something that's smaller, to your point, I think I'm just repeating what you've said, so just echoing, they're able to be more efficient, which means they're able to provide better service, better value, or continue to provide value, with the skills that they've been honing for decades, or, whatever time frame that they've been working on. It also actually makes them much more like valuable for a
Mhm.
PE firm in my mind, actually. So I think that it actually just ends up being net positive,
Yeah.
broadly speaking. There's also a lot of societal rippling effects that I think that also provides, because when you have these thriving, small medium businesses, then that are able to, I'm going to use the term, stay afloat in like they're
Mhm.
profitable and not maybe as stretched if things were maybe a lot more written down by hand, that sort of stuff. It does. I just wonder what like societal impacts of that would be, just to kind of think about from like a, yeah, just it's an interesting thought exercise. But all of this to say, back to what Austin was saying, please go talk to the person that you might wonder, maybe I don't want to talk to them. It's like, no, like, you might actually strike up a conversation with someone who's, in a completely different world than maybe some of us have been, like from like a tech capacity. But the intersection or the cross pollination of these worlds is where some really, really profitable ideas in my mind will pop up from, because sometimes the
Mhm.
most boringest niches or industries have the most opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a world in which, like, if you could imagine, like, yeah, taking the mom and pop store where, like, and one big issue in there is like, what happens when that person goes to retire, right? Um, how do they hand down that
Which
knowledge to their
again, we're
need?
starting
Do
to see
they sell it?
globally right now.
Yeah, there's that transfer, and it's like, are they able to hand it over internally, or do they just sell the thing for parts? And I think it would be a much easier thing for them to hand it over if there was something where it's like, hey, we have this like kind of like
Documented, repeatable process.
yeah, exactly. In this kind of trained employee here that will help you guide through this. It's going to remind you if you miss something like that. And it's like, so it's that like extra admin in the office that will make it possible for like the son or the daughter to come in and take the business and not be like, okay, I don't want to go through this huge file cabinet of notes that like my father or grandfather made. Let's instead I've got this thing and like it's gonna make sure that like I show up where I need to, stuff like that. If something goes off process, I might flag it, something like that. And so it kind of helps that like,
The institutional knowledge will just stay,
yeah,
which makes them more valuable at the end of the day.
yeah, exactly. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages there. And of course, I feel like it's worth it. A lot of the stuff within blockchain is like obvious, right? And those are easy adopters. Those are people that are already on the bleeding edge, already willing to do the like inconvenient thing to
Yeah.
try the new thing. But that broad, where the market will eventually need to go is those people where it's like, I have no idea what this is, and they need to be able to
It's
just
just a
talk to it.
general adoption growth thing, because
Yeah.
I mean, just like you said, like the early adopters are mostly here. You have a couple more rounds of folks that will start to, get involved. But
Mhm.
we, as a globe, I like to think that you truly hit your like full adoption when you go to those, niches, because you
Yeah.
do need everybody on board. It and it actually ends up having kind of like a network effect when you have the overall collective join in, because then the learning ability, the like knowledge sharing, even within from agent to agent, if you think about it, it becomes that much better. So this is actually like collectively beneficial.
Yeah. And so this is probably worth keeping in mind, in any topic, probably the world's foremost expert might not know how to export a PDF. Like that's
Yeah,
kind of who you're dealing with because
yeah,
that wasn't what they focused on. They never had
correct.
to do like they weren't doing that. So figuring out how to reach them is like, and it'll trickle down from there. But maybe as a last topic, you brought up swarms earlier, which is a
Yes.
really interesting idea. Of course, has its like technical difficulties when you get a bot talking to a bot. Stuff can sometimes go weird. Things like that. I guess like within the realm of swarms, where well, okay, let's just keep going in the same vein. Like some of the opportunities you see there, some of the cool ideas, things like that. Yeah, swarms.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much. I won't pretend to be an expert in swarms. I'll be the first one to say that I'm not. Um, I just think there is a lot there. Like just like you said, the ability, like once we enable, you know, the agent to agent within framework sort of communications, like how does that look like, and what are the kind of second order or third order effects of that? I'm going to be honest, like I'm not fully like, I haven't seen it all, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
waiting to see. But I think will be interesting. There's a team I was recently talking to. I'll just sort of, this concept of being able to verify actions, I think is a really interesting thing, because there's general thoughts around, hey, as soon as you want your agents to start doing things, whether it's agent to agent, human to agent, whatever the context may be, at some point verification does become very, I think, valuable, to be able to validate that, oh, said thing was actually completed.
Hmm.
I'm curious to see how much more important, my sense is it'll be pretty important, especially in the swarms kind of context, because now you're having to make sure that, like, like how did we get to the output, because it's not just that you're able to see their thought process, but you're also able to validate that said actions were completed,
Yeah.
even between agents, because hallucinations is just the thing that we all live with when we're talking about
Mhm.
agents. So I think there's going to be some really interesting things that come out of it, whether it's hey, I'm going to put two of my agents, a product management agent and like a social media agent, and have them debate a specific topic, or maybe something else. Like, I have a specific task that my, let's say, manager agent or like the overseeing agent will break it down and provide the task to each of the different agents based on what their individual specialization or expertise might be, and then making sure that those tasks are completed in the in a desired way, so it does roll up to whatever outcome we're trying to achieve. Yeah, I would be lying if I said I knew how all of this is going to work, but I wish I had a crystal ball, because I think there's going to be some really interesting things that come out of swarms.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour here. So, I mean, I would love to keep rolling on this, but I know we gave everybody a time slot, so they're expecting that. But I think um, so. Checking out the Eliza event calendar, absolutely do that. And where can they find that? Is that
So maybe start with the YouTube channel. I think that's probably the
YouTube
easiest, and
channel?
our
Okay.
Discord. Our Discord and our YouTube channel are probably the easiest places. Discord, you'll find all of this content. They'll direct you to the event calendar as well as all the other places.
Okay. Fantastic. And any other closing things, or like maybe stuff coming up on the roadmap should watch out for, or like words of wisdom, anything you want to?
Yeah, we're very excited about V2. So as soon as that's live, I'm very excited to make sure that everybody's onboarded, and or migrated over from the versions that they were using, if they so choose to. One piece from like a developer standpoint is execution is going to become very important as we look forward, because I think ideas are really amazing. Agents and the tooling associated will significantly help our ability to get an MVP done in like a fraction of the time than we historically have been. So when it comes to judging, or like when it comes to like rubber hitting the road, I think execution is going to matter more than ever. Not that it didn't before; execution always
Right.
mattered. But I think that's going to be the edge a team has.
Okay. Great. Good to know.
Well, that's just an opinion. It's not a fact. It's an opinion.
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah, 100%. And I mean, that's like it's a common arc too for stuff to follow. There's like that right at the beginning thing where like just getting something off the road is incredible, but after a while, you need things that are actually reliable and like do it right. So yeah, I mean, that's honestly a great sign that eyes are turning there because it shows that the ecosystem's starting to mature. That execution begins to matter more than just like how many POCs can we push out the door this week. Okay, great.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Austin. Really appreciate it.
All right, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, get back to building.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bust a deal, face the winner.